He's been arrested. All of his disciples have left. He's alone. He's been taken by a cohort of soldiers and priests. He's been having one trial so far with the high priest Caiaphas' house and been found guilty. And he's been now beat on, spit on, mocked. And this is just the beginning of a long night that Jesus is about to have. Welcome to Reasoning Through the Bible. We're in the latter parts of the book of Matthew. We're going to finish up chapter 26. What I just described to you were some of the events that took place in our last session in chapter 26. And as we finish up chapter 26 today, we have two more chapters, 27 and 28. There's a lot packed into those two chapters. And there's going to be a lot of good things, I think, Glenn, that we're going to get into in regards to the reason why Jesus came, the reason why we worship him, the reason why we're even doing these sessions of going through the book of Matthew and even through the scriptures in the Bible themselves.
Yes. And so where Jesus is at this point, he's been up all night. He was praying. He's gone through the trial with Caiaphas. It's still dark. And as Jesus was inside the house with the trial, Peter is outside. And this next section, we're going to hear what happens with Peter. And later on that day, as you mentioned, Steve, it's one thing after another for the rest of the morning on into his death on the cross, which the death on the cross and the resurrection are the central pivot points of history.
Right.
And so that's why in our gospel accounts, all of them, things go relatively quickly in the beginnings of the books. And as it gets down towards the last week and the last day of Jesus' life, the writers start adding more and more detail, and time kind of slows down while they explain a lot of details. Because the central reason of the Bible is what's going to happen here in these next chapters, which is Jesus' death on the cross, paying for my sin and paying for yours.
Yeah, this is all a culmination of a 3-year ministry that Jesus has had amongst the people and within the country.
So let me go ahead and read this next section. This is where Peter denies Jesus. And I'm starting in Matthew chapter 26, verse 69. Now Peter was sitting outside in the courtyard, and a servant girl came to him and said, "You too were with Jesus the Galilean." But he denied it before them all, saying, "I do not know what you are talking about." When he had gone out to the gateway, another servant girl saw him and said to those who were there, "This man was with Jesus of Nazareth." And again he denied it with an oath, "I do not know the man." And a little later the bystanders came up and said to Peter, "Surely you too are one of them, for even the way you talk gives you away." And he began to curse and swear, "I do not know the man." And immediately a rooster crowed. And Peter remembered the word which Jesus had said, "Before a rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times." And he went out and wept bitterly.
Yeah.
So we have this encounter with Peter. And again, the way the buildings were structured, there's a courtyard surrounded by parts of the building and where the rooms are. And you could stand out in the courtyard, kind of see what goes on inside.
This is the same Peter that a few hours before had said, "Oh no, Lord, I'll never abandon you." The same Peter that just a few hours before had taken his sword out and lopped off the ear of the high priest servant that was there with the group to arrest him. It's the same Peter that we're now talking about.
And so Peter that did those things, that was legitimately ready to die.
Right.
You pull out a sword and start using it on somebody, especially when there's guards and soldiers around, you're serious.
Right.
And so Peter was indeed serious.
Right.
But now he's denying Christ in front of a teenage girl that has no power, no influence, that's not a person of stature. And it's really, really ironic.
Right.
as we go through this, one of the things that I notice as I go through here is some of the small details. Peter was in a courtyard. He spoke to a servant girl.
Mm-hmm.
He moves to stand by the gate and talks with another person.
Right.
These kinds of details in the story tell us that this was an eyewitness account.
Yeah.
The people that write these things are writing them because they were there. They saw these things. It was so important to them. Oh, I went and stood by the gate. I was warming myself by the fire. I talked to this person. Details like that are not in myths and legends. Myths and legends just don't read like that. They don't have accounts, talking with whether it was a servant girl or somebody else, or where he was standing, whether it was next to the gate or next to the fire, or whether he was in the courtyard or outside the gate. None of that adds to any religious message.
Right.
It's just a factual historical detail by an eyewitness. And those things lead credence to the fact that these gospel accounts are eyewitness accounts.
And it's not flattering to a main character. What is more flattering is him pulling his sword out, is him denying that he would ever betray or deny Jesus. That's the flattering part. This is an event that's not flattering, that would have been probably better for Peter if it would have been forgotten about, but it wasn't.
If somebody was making up an account because later they wanted to lift up Peter as a hero, then they wouldn't have included this story, as you just pointed out.
Yeah.
This is embarrassing.
Right.
Any kind of a hero would not want to appear as meek and embarrassed and crying in front of a teenage girl. That's not the way to become an influential person in those days.
Now, I do think that it is depicted here or recorded here because earlier when all of the disciples are saying, "Oh no, it won't be me at the what we call the Last Supper, the Passover meal. Oh no, it won't. It's not going to be me that's going to." And Peter says, "I would die for you." Jesus says, "Before the night is through, Peter, you're going to deny me 3 times." So I do think that this is recorded here because of what Jesus had said.
Right.
But again, it doesn't take away from what we just described. It's an embarrassing moment.
They're just telling true history. They're just explaining what happened to them, what they saw.
Right.
The last verse at the end of this exercise, he went out and wept bitterly. How was Peter feeling at that point? What sort of emotions do you think?
Well, wept bitterly, that's a word that brings up, it's not just a crying. It's not just a weeping.
He's not just sad.
No, he's not just sad. You get the word picture of him, what we might say guffawing, just bitterly, just the whole thing of whenever something really tragic happens to you, where your whole body shakes and is just crying because you realize that you have done something that's so devastating for your life that you're just pouring out all of your emotions and feeling. So that's what I get. This isn't him just feeling sorry. This isn't him just, gently weeping or, he is truly remorseful and sorry. And I think maybe even you could say hating himself from the standpoint or disliking himself that he did deny Jesus. I mean, it's just, to me, that one word really describes a lot.
Big, strong, headstrong Peter is now shaken to his core. He is a broken man at this point. To somebody that was that strong of a person, that strong of a personality, to be weeping to the point of shaking. Again, the way you described it, Steve, was correct. He is shaken to his core, and he is a broken man at this point. And the emotion is just very strong in this story. Is there any indication when we read about Judas that Judas felt this level of sadness at his sin? No, it wasn't. So why do we think, if we look at this denial, why do we think that Peter actually denied Christ at this point? Why would he not say, yes, I'm a follower? Why would he deny it in front of the lowest of the low, the young teenage servant girl?
Well, we're not told specifically, but I think in the context, here it is, their leader. Again, Jesus has been out for 3 years. He's been ministering, and Peter's seen it all. He's seen all the miracles and all of that. And he's truly a believer in Jesus. There's no doubt regarding that. But here has this powerful leader of his who he's seen miracle, who has been in control of nature, walked on water, calm seas, all of that. He's now been taken prisoner, and he's now being tried. He's being mocked, and he's being in control of other people, even though he's allowing it. And so I think that when the girl comes and says, oh, you're one of him, I think it hits him of, oh no, if I say, yes, I'm one of him, that they'll also come and get me and include me now, and they're going to arrest me.
Right. So I think that's a lot of it there is just fear of people.
Yeah.
Fear of what might happen to me. And the other word, if I think what might have caused this in Peter is Peter was a prideful man.
Yeah.
Peter was a prideful man. I think he had pride.
Yeah.
And when he then saw his Lord arrested, and Jesus was the strength in him. And so when Jesus is gone, now his pride gets shaken.
Yeah.
And when he realizes what he has just done, which was deny Christ in front of a young girl that had no power against him, then he realized how weak he really was. And his pride was broken, and his fear of people was showing. And I think that's what caused it.
Yeah. We kind of see an escalation in regards to when she first asked him, he just denies it. And then the second time, he goes, no, I can tell by your accent that you're a Galilean, right? And then he escalates it to where he's swearing at her. Cursity, cursity, cursity. No, I'm telling you, I'm not with him. That's an escalation of that even makes it worse in my mind, right? It's just not a denial, but it's first a denial, then second, it's like an actual cursing and swearing.
There was a story told by one of the more well-known public speakers, pastors, where he was going to a restaurant, and there was a waitress there that from the look on her face and the color of her skin, he was thinking, wow, she must be from this really exotic part of the world, some interesting, mysterious part of the world. And he was just about to ask where she was from when she walks up and says, y'all got y'all's iced tea yet? Your speech gives you away.
Right. Yeah.
So Peter here denied Christ.
Right.
Questions we should ask ourselves. Would I deny Jesus if I am publicly humiliated?
Yeah.
Would I stand with Jesus even if I don't understand what he's doing? Because Peter here didn't understand what was going on.
Right.
And if I deny Jesus, will I come back to him and beg forgiveness? Or will I run off in tragedy like Judas? Because I submit all of us are put in situations where we're tempted to deny Jesus.
Right.
We're all put in situations where we could deny our Lord. Deny him by silence, by not speaking up and just remaining quiet and not admitting to the world that I'm really a follower of Christ because it might hurt me publicly or might be a little bit embarrassing, or just flat out deny Christ. And so all of us need to be prepared in advance. What am I going to do if I'm put into a situation that I'm tempted to compromise? Because all of us could be a Peter.
Yeah, and I think all of us would probably, when things are going okay, would say, oh, I'll never deny Jesus. I'll never do it, just like the disciples do. But yet there could be situations that'll come up, especially if you feel that your life is in danger, where then you might deny Jesus. We know we all don't want to, but we never know what's going to take place.
Right.
And I say that in order not to be judgmental on Peter, right? He's a human being just like we are, and where we would say, oh, we would never do that. I don't think that we could ever say we would never do that no more than just what the disciples did. Depends on the situation.
If you liked what you heard, subscribe to Reasoning Through the Bible today. Don't miss this opportunity to grow in your knowledge and love of God's Word. Subscribe to Reasoning Through the Bible on your favorite podcast platform. So that gets us to the next passage, which is Matthew chapter 27. And here we have Judas. Again, several characters in the story. Time has slowed down, so we've looked at Peter. Now we're going to look at what happens to Judas. Judas realizes that he has made a mistake. And so the first phrase in chapter 27, now when morning came. Mm-hmm. And so that phrase there tells us that everything prior to this in the previous chapter all happened at night.
Yeah.
During the course of overnight. And so, again, as we mentioned in an earlier session, illegal trial at night in a private home, quickly, wasn't public, all these things.
Correct.
And so a lot of things that were done incorrectly. So let me go ahead and read the first few verses here of chapter 27. Now when morning came, all the chief priests and the elders of the people conferred together against Jesus to put him to death. And they bound him and led him away and delivered him to Pilate the governor. And when Judas, who had betrayed him, saw that he had been condemned, he felt remorse and returned the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests and elders, saying, I have sinned by betraying innocent blood. But they said, what is that to us? See to that yourself. And he threw the pieces of silver into the temple sanctuary and departed. And he went away and hanged himself. The chief priest took the pieces of silver and said, it is not lawful to put them into the temple treasury, since it is the price of blood. And they conferred together, and with the money bought the potter's field as a burial place for strangers. For this reason, that field has been called the field of blood to this day. Then that which was spoken through Jeremiah the prophet was fulfilled, and they took the 30 pieces of silver, the price of one whose price had been set by the sons of Israel, and they gave them for the potter's field, as the Lord directed me. And so here we have again Judas that comes back. They'd been up all night. Judas had betrayed him for these 30 pieces of silver. Mm-hmm. And so in verse 2, what do they do to Jesus there? They bind him, which means they tied him up. Why would they tie him up? Was he violent? Was he a chance of running away? Was he?
Well, would they even think that they would be able to control him? I mean, again, they've seen some of the things that he's done, but I think that's just generally how you treated prisoners.
I think it's probably the same reason that they brought a big crowd when they were trying to arrest him in the Garden of Gethsemane. There had been too many times in the past where Jesus had been in a public place and they tried to grab him,
right,
and he just walks through their midst. So they were trying to make sure this guy's not getting away.
And I think it's a form of humility too, that you're tied up.
It's a form of humiliating.
Yeah.
Here's another question related to that though. Did they need to tie him up? Was he going to run away?
No.
Why? Because he was voluntarily giving his life.
Correct.
He was the one, as we pointed out all along here, Jesus is the one who's controlling the circumstances.
Right.
And he is the one who is come here at this place at this time because he had a divine appointment with death on a cross. And so there's no reason to tie him up. They were afraid he was going to run away. But really, he was the one giving himself. No way was he going to actually run away.
And another reminder, too, is, again, the leadership really didn't want to do this. At the beginning of their plot to capture him, they were just going to capture him and keep him. They didn't want to take him through a trial and all of that. They wanted to wait until after the festival was over. But now we're seeing that that's not happening, that all of this stuff is happening right in the middle of the Passover festival, the Feast of Unleavened Bread. It's all happening, which really shows that, again, Jesus is in control of all the situation that's going on.
So then in verse 2 says they bound him and led him away and delivered him to Pilate the governor.
Yeah.
So who's this guy Pilate? What's he about?
Well, he was the actual Roman governor that was over this particular area of Israel or Judah. And so the city of Jerusalem was in his jurisdiction. So you had Caiaphas, who was the high priest that he's already gone to.
Caiaphas is Jewish.
Is Jewish, the Jewish high priest. You have Pilate, which is the Roman governor. And then we're going to see a little bit later Herod, who is he's Jewish, but yet he's appointed by the Roman governor, Roman government.
Herod was basically sold out to the Romans.
Correct.
And was really following the Romans' direction. Pilate was more of a military guy.
Yeah.
And was the governor.
Right.
And so you're absolutely correct. So we've got these different players here. And some of them, like Caiaphas, was Jewish and approaches things from the Jewish high priest perspective. This man, Pilate,
right.
Very Roman,
right,
not Jewish religion at all, comes to the situation from a very different perspective.
And he's being watched by the central government back in Rome. And part of what he's supposed to do is he's supposed to keep the peace in the area, because again, the Romans are occupying the nation and there's uprisings that take place periodically. In fact, Barabbas was somebody, again, that we'll see was a partaker of an uprising and been causing trouble. So Pilate is generally there. He wants to keep peace. He doesn't want to see a bunch of...
He doesn't want to see an uprising.
He
wants peace.
He doesn't want to see he doesn't want to do anything that's going to rile up the people. So he knows that he's kind of got a situation on his hands when they bring him to him. But he knows what's going on because, again, he's the one that had released the cohort to go and arrest Jesus. So, and he's waiting for him whenever Jesus shows up early in the morning.
But and as we'll see later in the chapter, Pilate ultimately gives in and condemns Jesus.
Right.
So Jesus was condemned both by the Jewish leaders and the Roman leaders, the Gentile leaders.
Correct. And one last thing before we go further, the question comes in, okay, well, why is Caiaphas, who is the Jewish leadership, they've already condemned him. Why are they sending him to Pilate? Well, because they don't have the authority to kill him, and they don't want to because they're trying to appease the people as well. And so you kind of see this a little bit of political gamesmanship of trying to get the Romans. But again, Jesus had predicted that he was going to be crucified, death by crucifixion, which was a Roman capital punishment, not a Jewish capital punishment.
Right. And the Romans were controlling things with an iron boot, iron sandal, if you will. They were in control.
Yeah.
And so they had said, you guys cannot have a capital punishment unless you go through us.
Right.
And this guy Pilate, he was a tough, hard man.
Yeah.
We're told in Luke 13:1 that Pilate mixed the Galileans' blood with their sacrifices, which means that he killed some Galilean Jews at the time of their sacrifice. He could be very no-nonsense if need be.
Right.
And as we pointed out, Pilate's in a difficult spot here. He's also attested in history. Archaeologists uncovered a stone with his name chiseled in it a few years back.
Yep.
And so the Bible presents accurate history. Verse 3, Judas was close enough that he saw Jesus condemned. So he didn't just run away. In verse 3, it says Judas saw that he had been condemned, that Jesus had been condemned. So he was close enough hanging around where he saw Jesus condemned. How did Judas feel in verse 3 when he saw that Jesus was going to be killed? What emotion does he have in verse 3?
He says he felt remorse enough to go and return the money.
And what's interesting, he says in verse 4, what reason does he give for this remorse?
Because he had betrayed innocent blood. And we knew this. I mean, he knows that Jesus is innocent.
He knew Jesus was innocent. Yeah. He betrayed him anyway for the money.
Right.
And so he says Jesus is innocent. He takes the money back when he sees that Jesus was condemned to death. Apparently, he didn't expect Jesus to be condemned. He must not have believed that Jesus would truly be condemned to death. And when he was, it's shaken Judas up. It's shaken him to his core. But what's the difference in Judas's remorse and the way Peter acted. Is Judas truly repentant in a biblical sense?
No.
Or is he just feeling bad? What's the difference in remorse and repentance?
Yeah, well, this particular word, it has the meaning of changing one's mind, which is what repentance is, but this is a different Greek word. It has the meaning of changing one's mind or purpose after having done something regrettable, which expresses the mere desire that what is done may be undone, accompanied with regrets or even remorse, but with no effective change of heart. So he's remorseful, but he's not really having a change of heart in regards to what he's sorry that he's done what he's done, but yet he doesn't really have a change of heart.
He's sad that he made the decision because now his plans have all fallen apart, whatever they were. The situation's in a bad spot, so he's feeling bad. He's not repentant in the sense that I want to go back to God and ask forgiveness.
Correct.
So he admitted to the priest that he betrayed an innocent man, but he didn't repent of the love of money. Nowhere in here does he say, my greed was bad.
Right.
He said, oh, the person I betrayed was innocent. Anyone who knows they've sinned and know that they need to go to God and ask forgiveness and does so with an open heart and truly goes back to God for forgiveness will be forgiven. If we just feel bad because I created a jam for myself, that's not enough to qualify as biblical repentance.
Right.
So here we have Judas, the betrayer, telling the leaders that Jesus was innocent. At this point, what would a fair judge do, or at least consider?
Acquitting the one that was condemned.
Yes.
Of saying, hey, if he's innocent, then he doesn't need to be put to death.
If it was fair, that's what they'd be trying to do.
Right, because again, Judas is the main one who came and brought an accusation.
So the Jewish leaders at this point are not trying to be fair.
Right.
There's no indication here. Matter of fact, how do they respond in verse 4 to Judas?
They kind of said tough.
Yeah, what's that to me?
What's that to us? You've done what you've done, so, you made your bed, go lie in it.
Do they seem to have a heart of like a sensitive spiritual counselor here?
No,
We've got somebody that came and they're really sad. They're really in a bad spot emotionally because I just did something horrible.
Right.
They may not be biblically repentant,
right,
but they're coming to you in a really emotional state saying, I really messed up.
Yeah.
Now, what would a true counselor, chaplain, pastor, priest want to do here?
I think that they would want to take them. They'd want to counsel with them. They would want to understand, why they feel that way. What is it? And maybe even talk them through it, so to speak. They just cast them aside. I mean, you get the sense that he was used. He was used by them, and that's all they need. They're through with him. He served their purpose, and they don't have anything else to do with him.
Right, and so I can imagine the emotions that Judas had when he came to him, and they're just saying, I don't care. What's that to me? Get out of here.
Yeah.
Not a good spiritual counselor.
No. And you also get the sense based upon his actions that I can't go back to the other 11 disciples. I've actually betrayed Jesus, so I'm not going to be welcome there.
So why were these priests so insensitive? Because they really didn't care.
Yeah. They were just using him. They had just been looking for somebody that would help them get Jesus arrested.
And so after this callous response, the next verse 5, Judas goes and kills himself.
Right.
The last thing we would ever want on our conscience is for someone to go and hurt themselves because we make an insensitive remark. We like to think that I'm not near as bad as these Jewish priests were back in the first century.
Right.
But really, all of us are potentially capable of being just as insensitive to people. If someone has done a great evil, and if they're remorseful, we should find a way to comfort them. If somebody around us, especially people that have maybe hurt me very badly, that pain of that hurt sometimes leads people to be just as callous and tough with people. And sometimes we need to get past our own hurt to the point where if somebody around us if they're in a spot of severe remorse, then we need to be sensitive to that. The last thing we want on our conscience, somebody go off and hurt themselves because I was insensitive. Remember when Jesus cast the demons into the pigs? What'd they do? They ran off and...
You talking about the pigs or the people?
The pigs.
The pigs ran off the side of a cliff and killed themselves.
The demons went into the pigs, and the pigs ran off and killed themselves.
Right.
Luke 22:3, Satan enters Judas at this point.
Yeah.
Matthew doesn't mention it. So Satan enters Judas, and he goes off and kills himself.
Yeah.
The devil comes to steal, kill, and destroy, John 10:10.
Right.
So anytime there's demonic activity or Satan around, death follows.
Yeah.
We live in a culture that's highly focused on death. That's as far as I'll take it.
Yeah.
Is that, but there's probably a lot of demonic activity in the background.
Yeah.
There's a lot of death around us.
Yeah. And none of those, Satan and none of those demonic figures, they don't have your best interest. They're just using people similar to how these leaders had used Judas. And so Judas's death didn't really mean anything to anybody, not even Satan or the demonic realm.
So get the picture with the story. Judas comes to these priests and says, I'll sell them out to you if you pay me.
Yeah.
And so they paid him. And Judas ends up selling them out. Jesus is arrested. Judas comes back and he says, I betrayed an innocent man.
Yeah.
And I'm feeling really sad. And they say, okay, so what? What's that to me?
Right.
Judas then goes and kills himself, gives the money back. The Jewish leaders say, oh, we need to follow the law here about what to do with this money.
Yeah, we can't take its blood money.
It's blood money, so we can't put it back. We need to be careful and follow the Mosaic law here and our traditions.
Which brings up something is that they had used temple money to pay for somebody to betray another. So the very fact that they call it blood money that had been originally taken from the temple treasury, but now turn around and say, oh, we can't put it back. Again, it's just a big old one big.
So they're very
lie.
particular about following the law in one area, while at the same time they had paid the bribery for not bribery, but they had paid her like a fee to this guy to betray an innocent man,
right? And
had then been so insensitive to him when he came to it with a spiritual need, and the hypocrisy is just oozing out all over the room here.
Yeah.
It was called the field of blood because it was bought with blood money, right? In Acts chapter 1, verse 18 and 19, it also records the death of Judas and the purchase of the field. And these two accounts are not in conflict because if they actually harmonize quite well when we put them together. Judas apparently hung himself over a cliff and in doing so smashed himself against the rocks. And then in verse 6, the priests are concerned about this following the law, because they're not concerned about the plot to kill an innocent man, but they are concerned about this minor point of the law. The Jewish leaders end up fulfilling prophecy, apparently without realizing it, because Matthew here in verses 9 and 10 quote these Old Testament prophecies in Zechariah 11:12 is where this is from. And so the Jewish leaders fulfill prophecy without realizing that.
Right.
The theologians call this the providence of God, where God providentially works out things to fulfill his prophecy, even though it's done through the free will act of these priests. So this was yet another prophecy that was literally fulfilled.
Right.
The only last minor point on this that I have, Steve, is that it says here that Jeremiah the prophet, but really the quotes from Zechariah.
Correct.
And there's a simple reason for that. In the Old Testament Jewish scrolls, they had multiple books in one scroll. And so the Jeremiah scroll had Jeremiah as the first book in there. And then Zechariah was one of the later prophets in that same scroll. So he's basically saying in the Jeremiah book, Jeremiah scroll is where it says this. Yeah. So that was just the comment. Again, Matthew, very Jewish. And so if you understand a Jewish perspective, then you understand what he's doing. So any last things on that, Steve? I think we're about at a good stopping point for today.
Yeah, no, I don't have anything else. We're getting ready to get into some more interesting things and as we continue through here.
Okay, so next time we'll be back with this man Pilate, and we get to really see how he tries to squirm to get out of the jam he's in and really trying to save Jesus. But we end up finding that the Roman Pilate and the Jewish leaders are really following some of the same motivations here. And so we'll learn that next time as we reason our way through the Bible.